Great, thanks, Mary. Welcome to this webinar. I'm really excited to share with everyone uh, a framework and a way that we can help solve better problems with analytics. This is something I'm really passionate about because of a whole bunch of reasons that'll be clear throughout this presentation. A tiny bit about me, like Mary mentioned, I am going to be chairing the 2026 Analytics Plus conference, which will be in Maryland in April. If you'd like to get more information about that conference, you can go ahead to the conference website or go to informs.org. So I want to start with a sort of experience a lot of analysts have. So we get asked to build some sort of report, maybe a 3D pie chart showing market share of different platforms. And we sort of ask ourselves, how will you use this to do something useful? We sort of think through the way that it's being asked, the information and how it's being presented, and we sort of look at this 3D pie chart and say, how could you possibly use this? But when you push back, when you say, what is your plan for using this material? The person says, I want to have some data-driven decisions. I'm looking for actionable insights, and this is what I need. And so we build it anyway. And it's really frustrating because really there's a high cost to doing what you're asked. What you end up with is ignored results because there was no way to use the thing you were asked for. You've just wasted your time. And really, the biggest frustration is that there are worse decisions as a result. So you've gone through all this effort to create the report that people asked for, and they can't use it. And so it's really just a frustrating experience all around. It doesn't have to be that way, as I like to think of it. You can have fun with data. But you have to take the right approach and you have to work with the people who are trying to make these decisions. And you have to understand that decision-focused framework, which is what we'll be going through today. One thing I want to call out, so a lot of people would think that their job is to produce right answers or produce results. And I'd argue that it's to use analytics to make better decisions. That's really the aspiration of all analytics work. And so that's what we're going to be aimed at today. As like a really specific actionable takeaway, I want you to understand that our job as analytics professionals or analysts is to make data useful. So that 3D pie chart I got a couple slides back was from this website aimed at no more pie charts. And just in case you haven't gotten exposed to all this hate for pie charts, and especially 3D pie charts, it makes it really hard to interpret the results for our brains. So if I asked you which slice is bigger on the 3D pie chart on the left, it's kind of hard to figure that out because of the angles and just the perspective and all that. If you take that, even if it's what you were asked for, and you turn it into something else, something that uses your analytics expertise to make it really clear, it's going to be much more interpretable for the end users. And so this is the sort of like just a micro example of the sorts of things we can do as analytics professionals to make sure that the data and the analysis we're doing is useful. So this presentation is going to have a framework to make data useful. In way of agenda, we're going to take this framing from prescriptive analytics, borrowed from optimization, and it really helps us align our work in analytics to decisions. One example I have is the Informs Analytics Framework. So this is a great resource. It has all this information of all the tasks you have to do to have successful analytics projects. And one thing that's key as an example is you can't have any impact at all unless your results are used. And so the end part of the analytics framework is making sure that things actually get deployed, that they actually get maintained. And so this perspective that in order to have useful impact on the world, you have to actually use the results, you have to be aligned to decisions. That's really key in prescriptive analytics in this presentation. I'm going to go over the basics of optimization. So I'll have a touch on the methods. If you haven't learned about optimization before, that's kind of expected. If you have, we're only spending a little bit of time on it. But then we'll get into the mindset, sort of the implications and consequences of setting up analytics problems using this framework. One of my key messages is that building the right thing is a choice. And so, like in the previous slide where we had a three-dimensional pie chart on the one hand, and a much easier to interpret line graph on the right, that's a choice you can make as an analytics professional. And really, it's your choice to make. We're the ones with the expertise to learn how to make great decisions with data. So we'll cover a framework for making that choice. And then there are some examples at the end. So we'll get into some examples from my client work, just to sort of make it more concrete of how do you take this framework and apply it to analytics or analysis. So when I think of prescriptive analytics, I really think of it a little bit like this clear yellow road that's showing you where you're going to go. So it really guides you by aligning you to those decisions people are going to make. So that's one way of really understanding it, is that it's a path through perhaps a very messy world with lots of different kinds of data, lots of different kinds of requests. And so we'll just jump straight to this first key question of what decision are you trying to make? And the way I really think about it is if you want to have any benefits at all, any output that affects the world, you have to be taking different actions as a result of your work, or you have to be making different decisions. And so that's really the framework of making analytics more useful, solving better problems with analytics. It's making sure that you understand what decisions might be influenced by this analysis or this data, and how are those decisions going to be improved through the data and analysis. So we're looking for benefits, outcomes, impacts on the world, impacts to the bottom or top line if you're at a company. How is the world going to be different after you've done this analysis and made a different decision as a result of it? So if you know what decision you're trying to make, you can now link it to those outcomes. So a few quick examples here. When you think of inventory, how many boxes of cereal should we buy at the store, or should we stock at a store? So if you think of a grocery store, sometimes you go in, you want to buy something, there's none on the shelf. And sometimes they have so much and it's actually expired, you notice, after you get home. And those are both examples of how decisions can impact outcomes. That grocery store decided how many boxes of that kind of cereal to buy at some point in the past. And as a result of that, there is either no cereal, fresh cereal, or expired cereal on the shelf waiting for you when you decide to go buy it. Staffing is another really intuitive example where you can go into a restaurant and they had to decide how many employees to have on staff that day at that time. That's going to impact how long you have to wait, how quickly you get your food, and those sorts of things as well. Another example, pricing. So when you are deciding what's price to sell products at, a higher price will usually lead to lower sales. And so you might want to be thinking about that sweet spot of how do you manage your pricing, and especially how do you manage your pricing over time to make as much money as you can. And so I just want to emphasize here that these decisions are really tightly linked to the outcomes, even if it's a little bit hard to see and develop those models of those relationships. They're there. There are these causal relationships. And so we should ask ourselves how our decisions are going to impact outcomes. Our little choices as analysts determine the success of the project. And so the way I think of it here is a little bit like a corn maze. So assuming folks are from all over, but in the Midwest, we often have these corn mazes in fall where you're trying to get through and you sometimes run into a dead end. And so when you make the wrong choice, you might end up going down this path of having an analysis that isn't useful for anything. And we make all these little choices just as we go. Okay, this data, I don't have it. Should I dig further and find it, or should I just do the best I can with the data I've got? And depending on your decision and the importance of that data, it could doom the project. Similarly, with analysis, maybe you're deciding what's good enough accuracy for a forecast. And it can be hard to tell what good enough is. And the little trick here is often good enough is having a good forecast for most of your products. And then there's going to be those outliers where the key takeaway is we can't really forecast this at all. Something else is going on behind the scenes. And so these are the products that we can forecast, and these are the ones we can't. And those little choices can make a really huge difference in how the project goes. Optimization is a tool for modeling decisions. And so I'm going to introduce sort of the way we naturally think about it, and then we'll talk about the math just a little bit. So let's suppose you want to decide what to eat. Um, I'll say for a moment that maybe we want to minimize our costs, but you need to meet nutritional requirements. You don't want to eat too much of any one food. And so now we have this question, what decisions can we make? And how does that link to our goals? And also these requirements that we've got. Just to think a little bit ahead, the way we usually write this down in optimization is we have a list of foods and we ask ourselves, how many servings of baked potatoes do you want? How many servings of carrots do you want? How many servings of apples do you want? And those are the decisions. So this is how we link those decisions you can make to the things we care about. So that those word-based versions are sort of the natural form, which we can turn into equations a computer can understand. If you do know about optimization, one fun trick is that writing it down is usually the easy part. It's making it really accurate, so you have to iterate. We'll talk more about that. And there's also all these tricks to make it easier for the computer to solve. So the version I wrote on the previous slide is the way we think about it as people, but there might be changes you'll make in order to make it easier for a computer to solve it quickly. So mathematical optimization has this notation, so this technical math for defining the best decision. These are the exact same things I covered a couple slides ago. So we're minimizing the costs of food eaten. This lowercase f is now the number of servings of each of those foods. So the number of baked potatoes, the number of carrots, the number of apples. We're trying to minimize the cost because that's what we said a moment ago we cared about. We're going to have these limits on the number of servings we want to have. So that's the without eating too much. And then in the middle here, we have those bounds on nutrition that you need to eat enough vitamin C, but not too much, and things like that. And so this is how we write it all out. One other thing that I think is a little bit fun about this way of writing down decisions is we also have to tell the computer you can't eat negative food. If you forget to tell it that, it might tell you to eat negative food of something very expensive and say, I'm just printing money. And now I can use that money to buy the food I actually need to eat. And so you have to tell it these really weird edge cases you would never think to tell a person because the computer doesn't have common sense. It just knows what you tell it about the problem. And so it's always this iterative process of figuring out the right information to tell the computer. In order to write down this model of a decision, it's these same basic three questions that we've been hinting at throughout. What decisions can we make? How do those decisions connect to the goals we have or objective? And what rules do we have on our decisions? So what are the constraints? And this is the key thing. Anytime we're trying to work and develop a model of decisions or develop an analysis at all and have it help make better decisions, your question should be, okay, what decisions are we going to make based on this analysis? How do they connect to the goals we have? And what rules do we have about our decisions? Just to go in a little bit of a tangent here, imagine that you're that analyst in the corn maze trying to figure out if you should go down and get some new data, if you really need this new data. Well, if it's going to have a huge impact on your decisions, whatever that data might be, you're going to need to go get that information if you're going to make those decisions well. And so these are the ways that it can really connect to those decisions you're trying to make and the analysis you're trying to do by just looking at what information is crucial to making those decisions well. Again, like I mentioned with this forecasting example, sometimes the answer is we can solve one set of the problems really well and this other set not so well. And so then what we're trying to do is use analysis to highlight where do we have the right information to create a model of a decision, and where do we need to sort of have more of a human touch to make that judgment. So I already talked about this a tiny bit, where sometimes you write out a model and you'll end up finding a mistake in it. So this is really true in optimization. And I think one of the more fun parts where I treat it as a sort of a mystery of what's the computer going to figure out that I forgot to tell it? Is it going to figure out that you can eat negative food and I forgot about that? So this example is pre-AI, pre-chat GPT, but it's this idea that you have some manager, they're tired of running out of paper clips. And so they ask general intelligence, an artificial general intelligence, I never want to run out of paper clips again. How many should I manufacture or how many should I buy? And the artificial intelligence is going to say, use all the steel in the world to make paper clips. And this is clearly a mistake because you really didn't really mean never run out of paper clips again. But if you don't tell the computer exactly what you mean, it's going to go to the limit. It's going to take those extreme points of view because it really likes those extremes. And so this is one thing where if you ask a computer to make a decision and it gives you a really lousy outcome, you really start to ask yourself, what new information do I need to give it so that way it'll make better decisions in the future? Other times we find a gap in our model, so we need to reformulate. So this example was one I had when I was in graduate school. I lived in Ann Arbor, and a couple times I drove to Buffalo. And when I asked Garmin and Google Maps how to get to Buffalo, it would tell me it's faster to cut through Canada. So if you look on the screen, this section is Canada, there's Toronto, and it would always tell us it was shorter to drive through Canada. And if you didn't notice that you needed your passport, you might have a kind of unpleasant discovery half an hour into your trip. And so this is an example to me where we will find a gap in our model that we didn't realize we needed to tell the computer, don't drive through Canada. And if this time savings was, say, 3 hours, it would probably make a lot of sense to take that shortcut. But it's something where you might not realize until you see the solution that, man, I really don't want to drive through Canada just to save 40 minutes of driving time. I think this is also interesting because a lot of people are both enthusiastic and hesitant to trust computers to make decisions. And this is a great example because I think most of us would say Google Maps is pretty good at what it does, but it still has these gaps. And so that's where creating a way for us to interact with possible options is a great way to make it easier to trust a computer to make the right decision. My key message with these examples, and I've got one more here, is that a bad solution comes from a bad problem. So say you're working on some code and you ask a computer to eliminate the errors in your code. And it says, can do, you now have 0 lines of code. This is one of the easiest ways to eliminate errors in grammar and code and anything, is just to delete it all. And we immediately have this realization of that's not what I meant. There was actually a story this summer where effectively this happened, where there was a coding support tool and it deleted production data. I imagine because it made a very similar error to this one. It was asked to do something, it wasn't sure what to do, and its interpretation of that was to delete the data. And so it's really interesting when you see these edge cases because you wouldn't ever expect a human to do this, but computers really take things very literally, and you have to think very carefully about all that. So when we get to this point, you ask yourself, was the solution wrong or the problem itself? When we ask a computer to make decisions and we've written it as an optimization, It's clear it's the problem that was wrong, not the solution. The solution was the correct answer to the question the computer was given. And the same thing applies to problem solving as analysts and the work we do in general. So if you think of it as crafting the right problem so you get the right solution, you can be much, much more effective in your work. So the way I think of this is that which problem to solve is a problem. I've come up with the term meta problem to design to find this idea. So it's really this question and a methodology around defining the best problems to solve based on the goals you're trying to accomplish. It's borrowing very much from uh, optimization and this prescriptive analytics mindset that once you've written down the problem, the solution's kind of implied. It's kind of baked in. The way I think of this is a little bit like a train. So once you've set yourself down this path, problems are going to determine the solution, and it can be really hard to change your course. One thing I'll mention here when it comes to, say, developing a project plan and Agile, I think one of the big strengths is that you've built in these checkpoints where you're going to reassess what problems you should be solving and which solutions you should work towards. And so it's really key to keep in mind where you're headed and when you should check your course. So that way you can maybe make a fine-tuned different plan based on what you learn along the way. Like I already started to say, iteration is kind of the secret to choosing good problems. So let's look at this example where I wanted to ask Gemini to give me 3 suggestions for images of solving the wrong problem. And it gave me examples like a person unlocking the wrong door with the right key. And until I saw those examples, I didn't really realize that it wasn't quite the right question to ask. And so I asked another question. I said, update your answers to be about business situations. And then we got things that resonate a lot more with the content of this presentation, like a team perfecting a product no customer wants, or a manager cutting costs in the wrong department, or a company optimizing delivery speed while ignoring product quality. And what I think is really interesting and powerful about AI as a tool is it's made some of these iteration loops much faster. So you ask a question, you get a solution. And this is very much what optimization models have done for a long time. You're trying to write down a question to an optimization model of what food should I eat? It tells you to eat negative steak because that's really expensive, and then it's printing money. And you say, oh, no, that's not what I meant. And you give it a different set of inputs, and it will give you a different set of outputs. And so this iteration really helps you choose good problems, whether you're asking an optimization model, whether you're iterating with an AI tool, whether you're just talking to folks. And so I think when you're trying to craft good problems, it's that outside perspective that really can help you make sense of what you really want. Prescriptive Analytics, this optimization framework, is a tool for defining and then refining the best decision. Like we've been saying, you ask yourself, what decisions can we make? How do our decisions connect to the business objective, the goals, whatever we're trying to accomplish? And then what constraints do we have on our decisions? In short, what outcomes can we improve with the right decision? This takes us back to the beginning of the presentation, where we said, what decisions are we going to potentially make differently as we do analysis, as we develop models, as we create a prediction model, as we use machine learning, as we do create a dashboard, whatever it might be. You need to be putting yourself in the role of understanding what will be different after we have this model that we didn't have beforehand. And this, getting back again to the very beginning, helps us understand what our stakeholders need when they ask us to do an analysis. They usually aren't just looking for you to build a report just because. They're trying to answer some question. And if you can understand what question that is, what decision it links to, it can help you make better decisions about how to build the analysis and reports. So I think of this a little bit like a magic wand. Once you have this understanding, it really can guide you no matter what analytics problem you're working on, what solution you're building. It just becomes this direction that can guide you in any situation. One thing that's interesting to me is that the right problem is going to depend on costs and results, and maybe timelines, and maybe preferences, and maybe all sorts of different things. And it's really through comparison where you say, okay, if I were to choose problem one, here's what I expect would be the outcome of that choice. And if I choose problem two, I'm going to get this different mix of benefits and costs. And if I choose problem three, I get still a different set of options. And it's when we compare these that we really start to realize what it is we care about. And for example, I've been really thinking that in this AI world where technologies are changing quite quickly, the ones we pick today might be obsolete 6 months from now. And so you start having to ask yourself, okay, time to value, which has always been important, is even more important when technology can change just next week. When the models can change 6 months from now, you don't want to spend a whole bunch of time developing something that might be obsolete just right around the corner. And so this domain-specific context, the world around us, really is going to help guide what the right problem is for a specific situation. I have a few examples to dive into next, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. So the first example is one that I've worked with a lot of clients on dashboards. And so this was an example I found online of a retail analysis. Um, so they have 104 stores. This year they had $22 million in sales. And I don't know if anyone else on the call has built these kinds of dashboards, but I've had clients who ask for this sort of thing. I've seen it from other clients, and it's really information overload. And when you look at this, you sort of say, okay, we've been going through this decision-focused approach. What decisions can you make differently when you look at this kind of information compared to if you didn't have it at your fingertips? And so as I went down this path, like almost nothing on this page is actionable because it doesn't have enough detail for us to really make better decisions. Is 104 stores the right number? Who knows? We have a little bit lower sales this year. Is that a problem? Who knows? It's really not clear from the information we have here what you should be doing differently um, in your work as a retailer in this case. And so these are the kinds of things that I've started to ask more questions. And sometimes the answer is we need a dashboard like this because we all need to be speaking the same language about an organization. And that's fine. If the information is really just to help people understand the business at the high level, but not make decisions, that's fine. But if people are saying this is going to have so much return on investment because we'll be making better decisions when we have a dashboard like this, there's no connection to those decisions you're going to make right on this page. And so if you do want to have data-driven decisions, you need to select metrics that are useful. You need to connect them to the decisions you're going to be making differently in the future compared to when you didn't have the information at your fingertips. The next example I have is around forecasting, so you can make good purchasing decisions. And this is one, a lot of my examples are inventory related because I do a lot of work in that space, but also all of us go to the store and see that they have what we need or they don't. And so every store has to decide how many units of each different product do they want to have on their shelves. And what often happens is these people who are doing analysis, these inventory analysts, they'll ask the data scientist or the analyst to develop a forecast. So that way they can make purchasing decisions. And what's challenging is making good purchasing decisions isn't just about the forecast. It's how you put it together with other things like profitability or cost and lead times and things like that. And what's most interesting is you can have, if you have short lead times, you can actually have a pretty mediocre forecast while still making great purchasing decisions. Or as another example, say you're trying to buy something that's really durable, that doesn't run out, and you'll sell it eventually either way. you can make bigger mistakes in purchasing than if you're talking about something like lettuce that's going to go bad in 3 days. If you buy twice as much lettuce as you need, half of it will go bad. If you buy twice as many 2x4s as you need, well, it's just going to take a little bit longer. You're going to have more money wrapped up in inventory than you meant to. And so, really, this forecast, what people are usually focused on asking for from data scientists and analysts, is only one step along the way towards the decision. And when you create this whole decision-making framework, you can make much better choices with even less effort. And so it's one of those interesting things where if you work on the problem where you have the most opportunity to help, you can have much better results, not waste your time. Your results don't get ignored, and you have better outcomes as a result. The third example I wanted to go over was around choosing your problem in daily life. Like, say your car has your engine repair light on and other issues, and you're asking yourself, should I repair this car or should I replace it? And one thing I've personally done is I've gotten locked in to like only looking at one of these options. Or I take it to a repair shop, they give me a long list of issues, and then I take it to a different repair shop and they say, oh, only these two issues are really critical. Or you get thinking, okay, well, maybe it's time to replace my car, but if I'm going to replace it, I'm going to buy a really nice car because that was my plan, was to buy a really nice car. And you get caught in a loop again that way, where you get really attached to one idea instead of considering all your options. And so in your daily life, whether we're talking about a bigger decision like which car to buy, or smaller decisions like just what to eat for dinner, you can use the same framework of asking yourself, what are the goals I'm trying to achieve? What decisions can I make and how are they related to those goals? And are there any constraints or rules I need to consider when I'm deciding which is the best choice? So replace may be much more expensive in the short term. Maybe it's more expensive in the long term too. It kind of depends how old your car is, right? Where we make all these sorts of choices intuitively using these kinds of frameworks, but you sometimes get locked into the wrong point of view if you're not careful. Better problem solving really starts with deciding which problems to solve. I've had this throughout the presentation that you really need to understand your goals. If you're talking about analytics or analysis, we want to understand what data do we have available? How is it going to help us inform our decisions? What are our models of those decisions? And then when we take that data, when we use those models, how is that going to help us achieve our goals? What decisions can we make, and how can we create analysis and analytics that will help us make better decisions? One more piece of that, often you're not the one who's actually making the decision. You're doing an analysis, you're creating a report, which is going to help somebody else make a decision. And then you have to really understand what are their goals, what models will make sense to them, and you need to iterate. So really going into this with this expectation that you're going to create a first analysis, see if it's useful, see if it answers the right questions, and then redefine the problem based on what you learn as you go. So keep that in mind as you go forward. Last couple things I have to share. So April 12th to 14th, we have this Informs Analytics Plus conference. I'm really excited to be chairing it. This sort of content is all over the conference in a million little ways. And it's why I'm so passionate about this conference and wanted to run this webinar to bring more awareness to it. And also, we have a webinar coming up November 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern on the Informs Analytics Framework. So Catherine Walter, who is also a certified analytics professional at the expert level, will be going into this framework and really talking about the specific analytical roles and all these other things that can help you be more successful in your analytics projects. So with that, I'll leave that on the screen and see if there are any questions.
Yes, thank you, Zohar. That was great. One question is, do you have a recommendation for how to handle conversations around the quotes, give me a dashboard request when they don't understand the process?
This is where helping them understand what they're really asking for. So finding examples online can be really compelling. A lot of people they ask for things because they're not the expert in the room in analytics, right? So they've heard that dashboards are great. They've maybe even seen some good ones, and they don't know both the effort it's going to take to make something really useful, and they don't know what they really want. And so that's where creating these sort of mock-ups, even in PowerPoint, right, where you're just making a pretty picture or on a whiteboard and working with them to understand, okay, what do you want? What's it going to look like? And now tell me how those decisions are going to help the company. That's the part to me that's really most powerful is you start asking them, what decisions are you hoping you'll make differently based on the information in a dashboard? And if the answer is none, then you can say, okay, that might still be a valid business case, but it's going to be a different kind of business case than if they think they're going to make different decisions.
Awesome. That's great. Another question is we have a number of metrics we are looking at, but it would be difficult to include all of them on the dashboard. Is there some way to rank metrics for a dashboard? And are there any recommendations? There's a lot of questions in this one. And are there any recommendations on the number of metrics to put on a dashboard? And are there any recommendations on the number of dashboards required?
I think this is one of the opportunities for AI. So it depends a lot on your users, and that's the biggest thing. So earlier in my career, I'd build dashboards that had a million metrics and a ton of information, and certain business intelligence tools have this feature where like you click one visual and it filters the whole dashboard and it's amazing if you're trying to explore. And that's me as an analyst, and that is not my end users. And it took me so long to understand like my end users need information served up to them really clearly. And so it's part of why I'm excited about AI as an interface, as a possible way for people to get to that information. I have a client who's been my client for 2.5 years. We have all these amazing dashboards, and the CEO about a year and a half in commented, I feel like our entire dashboard our entire program should just be the product drill, where you could drill down to an individual SKU, so an individual product, and see what did you sell last year, what did you sell this year, what was the margin, what was the units, and just that information was so useful. And he's used to looking at so much information, but that was really what was key. And so that's where I think making it easy for people to get to the right information is key. And then really think about that user point of view. What I like as an analyst and how I use these tools is very different than most of my users. And so the right number of metrics will depend. Usually I do some lean consulting. We usually say ideally about five. But when it comes to like really drilling in and answering these deeper questions, like you need more than that. You're going to need lots of different detailed information and this year versus last year. And so it's really context dependent, but try to keep focused on what decision you're trying to make and how those users will navigate the data. Did I miss
Great.
any questions you
No,
noticed?
I think you got them all. Thank you. Um, We have a retired program manager wanting to do data analytics pro bono for struggling nonprofits. Fun fact, Informs has a pro bono analytics program. If you go to probonoanalytics.org, you can find out more about that. But his question is, can you translate some of these principles for social impact rather than profit? Or maybe guide him to an analytics framework, which we have in the chat, that is more focused away from business for profit models? Or do you think this framework is easily translatable to the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, so I'll answer. I get much more excited about improving the world through these tools. And so it doesn't just have to be profit. The one thing that's hard in a lot of these cases, it's a little more qualitative. My take is any decision we're making is sort of implicitly based on this sort of information, the goals we're trying to achieve, whether or not we've put a number to it, like what's social welfare worth? I don't know, but I know that I'd rather have more of it than less. And so framing things this way, to me, is applicable to every sort of problem, all the way down to preschoolers. So I'm excited. I have kids, and I'm planning to go present to first graders at my kids' school this year about problem solving as a puzzle. It's something to explore and figure out. And it's really tied to this mindset of figuring out what you want, what you care about, and what your options are to help achieve it. Hopefully that answers a little bit. And also, I do have my website where I have some of these examples written up.
Great. How do you recommend working in situations when stakeholders don't have the full understanding of what data is required for a task at hand?
So I'd say it's rare that they do. And you have to think of it as it's part of your job to understand the data. A mistake I've made is, I was looking at the most important data for a client, and it was also the hardest to get. And so we could have had some easier, quick wins if we changed the problem we were solving to focus on ones where the data was easy to get instead of hard to get. And so you kind of have to expect that even if they know what data is available, they're not going to know how clean it is. They're not going to know exactly how it connects to the decisions they're trying to make. That's your job as an analyst. Um, One other bit that's a fun thing, anytime you're getting started with a project as an analyst, I'm a consultant, so I come in a lot to new clients, and we always show them their data like summarized. And wouldn't you know it, your biggest customer segment is null category, because they haven't done the work to make their data clean yet. And they'll often argue initially, like, that's not my data. You're like, yes, it is. Like, look, line by line, we can show you it's your data. So there's just this challenge, and you have to think of it as part of the job to really navigate and understand all those nuances of what data is available, how good is it, can it be used for the purpose that it's being asked to serve.
Great. Another question is to be able to ask smart questions that pose credible challenge. What things should I focus on?
For me, the answer is I use optimization as this framework. So, what are the decisions we can make? What are the goals? How do the decisions connect to the goals? What are the rules and criteria? And then trade-offs is the other great rich opportunity where someone will say, I have 17 goals, but these three are the most important. Going back to like profit, one of my favorite questions is, okay, do you care about profit or revenue? And clients will say, sometimes they'll say revenue. Usually these days they say profit. And then you ask, but what about the other one? Or what about profitability? And just asking to understand, how do they trade off more profit dollars versus profit margin can be really interesting. So you go to the bank with profit dollars, but for certain kinds of companies at certain stages, like they care more about growing revenue, or they might care more about margin than they do flat profit. Or maybe they care about long-term growth, right? So you think of R&D, that's really investing in your future success. It's a cost today for an opportunity in the future. And that time-based factor can really make your decisions entirely different than if you're not looking at that time component. So those are the things I do to ask good questions. Is I go back to the optimization framework. What are your goals? What are your decisions? How do they connect? What are the constraints? But then I layer things in like trade-offs and time.
Great. Thank you. The next one is from John Milne. Hi, John. It's nice to see you. Do you use generative AI in your problem defining process?
I'm using it some. I need to use it more. So it's a tool. I like to use AI after I've done my first swath of trying to think of things, and then it can help fill in the gaps of what did I miss. I worked with a consultant who was helping me figure some of this stuff out. He was much more of AI as a first line of defense kind of person. And he fed it my blog posts and had a model that was creating really interesting insights just like that. And so I think it's a powerful tool that I haven't explored enough personally, but once you ask AI these sorts of questions, what other problems could I be solving? it has the entire, internet there to give you suggestions of other questions you could ask. And then your job is now more filtering. Okay, which goals are meaningful? I've been working through this framework with a client for a project, and I made my list of 10 goals, and he added some more and used AI to come up with more. And then we discussed them and ranked them. And one that wasn't even on my radar. So we were talking about using AI to build reports. And one of the things that was on his radar was he didn't want to have to think about the maintenance of these tools. So if AI created the report, hopefully AI could maintain it too. And that goal was just something that wasn't even on my radar. And maybe it would have been if I'd asked a model, for some other ideas.
Great. Can we use AI to solve optimization problem using natural language? Just giving instructions to an AI model or agentic to compute the optimization.
So the nice thing about if you do it more from less from an agentic and more of a generate the code for me in Python, and now I'm going to run it, and now it's going to have an error or not. I think there's a ton of opportunity to use AI to help you move faster, but you have to understand how it works and you have to know what good looks like in order to judge these outputs and fix the debug it and things like that. And so I personally use it less because for me, I'm practicing thinking and I want to become a better and better thinker. And when I outsource that to AI, I'm going to get rusty in coding. I'm going to get rusty in some of these skills. And so for me, it's like my third line of defense for anything except like acronym generation and give me a list of 17 examples like this. And those are the use cases I've found for it, but I know there was an experiment recently by some folks in Informs where they asked it to develop models and it tends to get you close but not quite right and you need to fix it. But it's a great starting point. It's a tool in the toolbox and that's just how I think of it.
Sure, sure. What recommendations do you have to navigate conversations around metrics with senior management, especially when requests come in that are time sensitive? Oh, sorry, time intensive, and because the C-suite asked for it.
Yeah, it's really challenging, and it depends on your role again. So, one thing I like about my role as an independent is I can be very direct, and kind of that's my job, is to be very direct and say, is this really something you want? And to push back if I think it won't be useful, but with that curiosity, with that, let's understand what you're trying to accomplish. And I'm perfectly willing to do something time intensive. It might be worth it. Or we can find a more efficient way to get things done if it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, do you really want to set your money on fire by doing something that will be useless? And so that's the way I come to it is this curiosity of what are you trying to accomplish? And I don't know everything. And that's really the mindset I bring to this is usually the person who's asking for something. They have a reason they asked for it, and they might not have told you, they might not even know it themselves, but there's some pain they're trying to address through this request. And you need to sort of evaluate that pain against the effort to get it done. And that has to be a joint exercise with the person who's asking. One last thing I'll mention on that is for me, I feel a little bit helpless if I can't talk to the folks who will actually, be using this thing, benefiting from it. And so if your layer's removed, at some point it's not your job to push back. It's your job to communicate to the person who's asked with you to build something. Okay, it's going to take me about, a month to do this. And they can say, okay, fine, or no, that doesn't work. Is there a faster way? And so to me, it's a little bit, what's your role? Is it your call? Is it your responsibility to push back? And depending on all of those things, that's how you navigate those situations.
Cool. So part analyst, part therapist.
That's how I treat it. Not everyone takes that approach, but once again, like to me, in a business context, in a nonprofit context, what are we trying to do here? And really always going back to that question, not just for the specific problem, but for the bigger picture of if you're a company, you're there to make money. Is this going to help you make money? If it's not, what are we even doing, right? So it's to me
Yeah,
that's the approach to take.
great. And then it looks like there's one more question, an ethical question. Do you know the legality of collected data?
I know there are lots of regulations out there. I think it is important for all analysts to be thinking about these sorts of questions. Um, One thing that often ends up in the news is these models that were built for a specific purpose and then they got used for a different purpose. And so when I am putting on that, what's the decision we're going to make hat, then I am trying to guide my clients away from things that I think are questionable. But it's just something that it's up to each analyst in each specific position to figure out how to answer those questions. I do think it's really good for us to be more aware. So just as one random example, I learned very early on that zip code plus birth date is uniquely identifying for like, and maybe plus gender, I don't, is uniquely identifying for like two-thirds of the US. And
Oh,
you
wow.
wouldn't think that birth date plus zip code is such personally identifying information, but it is. And so just treating your job as something where it's curious, it's interesting, you get to learn about these little facts. You wouldn't think some of these things would be have ethical implications, but they do. And so the more you learn is great. And if you're sort of hiring for these sorts of skills, it's important that you have someone on the team who's asking those questions to make sure that someone has that point of view.
Yeah, that's great. We also on the Informs website have some ethics guidelines that might be a good starting point for you too.
Absolutely. And it's part of the certified analytics professional as well. So there's some specific things that get called out, not everything, but there are a few really important topics that are in that framework at all the levels. So you can look at this Informs Analytics framework and look specifically for those ethics questions to understand sort of, again, the people who are asking for these things often haven't thought it all the way through to its sort of logical conclusion. And there's sort of this tendency to say, no one could have possibly have foreseen that this would happen. And you sort of say, if you thought about it,
Yeah,
you probably could have figured this out. And so that's, I think, a key lesson.
great. Well, thank you, Zohar. This was wonderful. We hope everyone has had a great time, learned some things. Check out the analytics conference, and then we hope to see you on the next webinar, November 12th, about the Informs Analytics Framework. Have a great day.